Bloodline El Salvador, Chapter 3. The owner of Enrique's Maison could hardly be described as a slumlord. He actually lived in the squalid dump, sweating out the beastly long, hot summers along with his tenants. Although his tenants weren't exactly of the elite class, the landlord greatly respected them. Why wouldn't he? Those hardened criminals would slice him up in a heartbeat if he messed with them, and he knew it. So when La Policía came visiting, he was understandably reticent to tell all. He first suspected that La Policía might be on the premises when his front door suddenly shattered into a shower of splinters, covering him from head to toe in a choking film of dust. "Jesus Christos!" he shouted in surprise, hands protectively covering his head as 5 burly policemen barged unannounced into the dark hovel. They stood blinking in confusion for a few seconds, trying to transition from the dazzling sunlight outside into the thick, humid gloom inside. One of them finally got his bearings, spotted the landlord, and dragged him unceremoniously from the couch onto the filthy tile floor. Still saying nothing, the policeman kicked the landlord viciously in the mouth. A couple of cracked yellow teeth went skittering across the ceramic tile, followed by a wispy trail of blood. The policeman squatted over the cowering man, bent down real close, and screamed, "Donde está Enrique, cabrón?" Tears streaming down his grimy cheeks, the landlord managed to get out the Spanish equivalent of "fuck you, motherfucker," and earned another good kick, this time in the solar plexus. Apparently, the second kick was the landlord's softening up quota. He whispered dejectedly, "Cuarto siete," and ended his confession with the Spanish equivalent of "you fucking motherfucker." This earned him one last kick, although a decidedly less zesty kick than the first two. The room was intolerably hot and stank of rotting meat. Armed with the information he came for, the policeman wanted nothing more than to get the heck out of that stinkhole. Ditto his fellow policemen, and they trooped out en masse in search of room 7. Enrique's half-moon indentation on his cheekbone had proved to be his downfall. The police had gone from maison to maison, searching for a teenager with a dinged-up face. One of the other maison owners had ratted Enrique out after a similar painful encounter with La Policía. They dragged Enrique out of his room and down to the police station. They poured a bucket of water over him and mercilessly beat his wet body with a 2-foot section of rubber hose. They beat him so severely that the top half of Enrique's left ear was ripped off. When Enrique recovered enough to travel, they transported him to a penitentiary in Santa Ana to await trial. In El Salvador, that may take several years. Over the next few months, his mother did not abandon him. Nadia made as many cocaine runs as she could for the street gang. She asked them to pay her in Mexican pesos. She knew that Enrique was as good as dead should he ever set foot in San Salvador again. La Policía Nacional had no one to answer to, and they routinely committed murder as their own infamous method of criminal rehabilitation. Nadia knew that she would have to get her son out of the country permanently. When she saved enough money, she packed a few clothes and caught a bus to Santa Ana. She found the penitentiary and bribed the prison warden. He arranged to have Enrique thrown in the back of a garbage truck as it left the prison with a full load of garbage. To tell the truth, the warden was glad to be done with Enrique. Even by prison standards, Enrique was a mean little bastard. Once reunited, Nadia and a very ripe Enrique hitchhiked to the Guatemalan border. They bribed their way across the Mexican border checkpoint and began a long, tortuous journey north through Mexico. Enrique had learned a few valuable skills in prison that would prove to be useful in their journey. He hid Nadia's money in a slender metal cylinder and pushed the cylinder up his rectum. Twice they would be robbed by Mexican banditos on their 3,000-mile odyssey northward. Enrique's rectal bank survived both robberies. It took Nadia and her son about 3 weeks to travel as far north as Puerto Vallarta. By then, their pesos had run out, along with Nadia's dream of reaching the United States and a better life. Enrique was more confident. "There's a park across the street, Mama. You can rest while I have a look around. Maybe I can make some money helping rich American tourists with their bags or something." Nadia gave him a sidelong glance of parental mistrust. "You'd better make sure that it's honest money, Enrique. I have no money to bribe your way out of another prison." "You worry too much, Mama," Enrique chided her. "I'm a new man. I don't want to go back to prison." He gave her a kiss on top of her head and walked away, saying, Tranquila, mama. Everything will work out okay. Enrique scoped out an area with expensive hotels. There were many elderly tourists window shopping and strolling in the sun. He spotted an old rusty bicycle in the alley behind the hotel near the dumpsters. It looked like it belonged to one of the employees of the hotel, probably a waiter or a busboy. Enrique looked around first, then jumped on the bicycle and took off. No one came running after him, so he figured the bicycle heist was a success. He rode around the streets a bit and happened upon a quaint section of town with many pottery and trinket shops. He spotted an elderly lady with a huge floppy-brimmed hat wearing a bright yellow muumuu. She staggered with a full load of souvenirs under one arm and the strap of an oversized leather purse draped over her other shoulder. Enrique didn't hesitate. He started pedaling full speed up the sidewalk and swooped toward her with one arm outstretched. He snatched her enormous purse, ripping the strap from her shoulder and bowling her over. He hauled ass to the street and looked back over his shoulder. She lay sprawled out on the sidewalk, screaming and yelling with broken pottery strewn about her. Enrique laughed as he pedaled through an alley and zigzagged on his escape route through town. The old lady was screaming in English, so he couldn't understand her insults anyway. When he felt that he had pedaled well past the commotion, he dumped the bike and kneeled down by a dumpster up an alleyway. He pawed through the purse and found $250 in cash. Enrique couldn't read or write, but he did know how to count currency from 5 different countries. The old lady was loaded, but now the wealth had changed hands. Enrique threw the purse up on a roof and started jogging toward the park where he had left his mother. Nadia didn't ask where Enrique got the money. What was she going to do, demand that he return it to his rightful owner? Nadia assumed that once they got to the United States, there would be so much opportunity that Enrique would straighten out and find a real job. Her assumption was incorrect. They caught a ferry boat to the city of La Paz at the southern tip of Baja California. They planned to hitchhike as much as possible to conserve their American dollars. Nadia knew they would have to have cash to bribe their way across the American border. Their journey north up the Baja California was depressingly desolate, through long stretches of inhospitable desert. They caught a ride just outside of Punta Prieta in the back of a beat-up old pickup truck. The driver was a laborer on his way to the next town of Santa Ynez. About 50 miles north of Punta Prieta, the old truck broke down. Nadia and Enrique decided to walk the remaining 22 miles to Santa Ynez. There was almost no traffic passing by, but they figured they could make the walk in a day and a half if they couldn't catch a ride. The road passed through the rugged Sierra San Pedro Marte region. Dusk set in, the searing late afternoon sun fading to a shimmering reddish-orange globe nestled behind the barren netherworld hills of the Baja Desert. Enrique and his mother peered anxiously about, the suffocating blackness enveloping the area with the uncanny swiftness of a desert nightfall. Suddenly Nadia sucked in her breath in wide-eyed alarm as 4 rough-looking men swaggered out from behind a rocky embankment by the side of the road. They looked like a greasy ragtag army, armed with a motley assortment of old saddle-ring rifles and double-barreled shotguns. The man nearest to Nadia and her son was young, with a mouthful of silver teeth glinting in a seemingly perpetual cocky smile. He had a small, deep scar over his eyebrow, immediately drawing attention to his discolored left eye, the pupil awash in a milky white center bordered by what was left of his brown retina. Silvertooth hailed him heartily with an exaggerated salute, 3 of his grimy brown fingers garishly adorned with fat silver and turquoise rings. "Hola, mi amigos! What brings you to our humble countryside?" Nadia and Enrique said nothing, their eyes averted down to the roadside. The men quickly advanced, their guns ready, and formed a semicircle around them. Silvertooth leered at Nadia, slowly drinking in her body from head to toe, with an all-too-obvious pause at her breast. Finally, satisfied with his private viewing, he lectured reprovingly. "You know, this is a private highway, and to pass through our land, you must pay a fee." "We have no money to give you, senor," Nadia said softly, her eyes still averted downward. "That's okay, senora. We also accept traveler's checks." The men roared in approval at Silvertooth's little joke. "I'm sorry, senora, but we must search you to make certain that you carry no illegal contraband onto our property." He slowly lifted up Nadia's peasant skirt with the barrel of his rifle. When the barrel reached her crotch, he started massaging her with the dull black metal of the rifle. Enrique took a protective lunge toward his mother, but the man behind him slammed his head with the side of a rifle butt. Enrique dropped to his knees with a surprised "Ugh!" His mouth open in stunned disbelief. "Never interfere with the duties of the authorities, young man," admonished Silvertooth. "Come now, Senora. I grow impatient. Take off your clothes so that we may conduct a proper search. This is official business." Silvertooth raised his rifle to point directly between Nadia's eyes and cocked the hammer back with an ominous click that seemed to magnify in the still night air. "Now, Senora." Trembling, a terrified Nadia pulled off her stained blouse and skirt with panicked eyes, focusing somewhere out in space. "Frisk her, Lieutenant," Silvertooth said to the man standing closest to Nadia. The man dropped to one knee and began patting down Nadia from her armpits down. When he got to her knees, he suddenly grabbed both her ankles and jerked her feet out from under her. As Nadia lay sprawling on the ground gasping for air, Silvertooth already had his trousers pulled down, his erection gleaming in the moonlight. He mounted Nadia as the man behind her son humanely knocked Enrique out cold with his rifle butt. With a start, Enrique came to, realizing that he was lying naked alongside his mother. The bandits had stolen every material possession they had, except their lives and Enrique's hidden rectal cylinder. His mother was curled up in the fetal position, her expressionless eyes still staring out into space. Enrique slowly got up, waves of nausea flowing through his body. His head pounded from being hit twice with the rifle butt. Trying to stand, he threw up in the scrub grass alongside the road. Head down, hands on his knees, he was forced to sit down until the dizziness subsided. Finally, he recovered enough to rise slowly to his feet. His ragged voice sounding guttural and raw, Enrique managed to croak out, "I'll go get help and come back." As an afterthought, "Will you be all right, Mama?" His mother nodded dumbly, and Enrique helped her to her feet. He guided her to a spot that wasn't visible from the road. He sat her down gently on a rock jutting out of the hard, scrabbled ground. "I'll be back, Mama." And with that, Enrique limped into the darkness. Nadia sat stiffly on a rock, her black eyes still registering no emotion. As soon as Enrique's footsteps were no longer audible, her body began to tremble, and Nadia cried, great sobs ringing out into the night. Enrique stepped gingerly along the shoulder of the road, the sharp gravel and occasional thistle cutting painfully into the soles of his bare feet. Grateful for the pitch blackness, Enrique thought about the humiliation of having to beg for help buck naked in broad daylight and picked up his pace considerably. After walking for at least a half an hour, he spotted the vague blur of a few yellow lights in the distance. After closing the gap, he realized that there were too few lights to be a town, but definitely some kind of outpost in the middle of nowhere. Still feeling his way along the shoulder of the road, he spotted a dirt driveway to the right of the road. He followed the meandering, rutted driveway until confronting a rusty barbed wire gate, leaning badly but still an effective barrier to a naked human being. With a start, Enrique noticed the soft yellow glow of animal eyes peering at him out of the inky blackness. When he heard the unmistakable rumbling of canine growling, he thought, "Holy shit!" The rumbling grew louder as the yellow glowing slinked closer. The bile of fear rose up into Enrique's throat. Every nerve ending tingled. His chest tightened as a rush of panic flowed through him. Naked, without a weapon. Jesus. The growling came closer. Suddenly an overwhelming rage came over Enrique. The sordid events of the last few hours pushed him over the brink. Scrabbling on all fours, he howled in frustration and swept the baked earth with his bare hands, coming up with the jagged rock. Wailing inhumanly, he hurled himself at the glowing eyes, rock held high over his head in both hands, wanting nothing less than to wipe the obscene glowing eyes off the face of the earth. He didn't get the chance. Wisely, the glowing eyes turned and bolted, the scratching of its claws against the rocky desert floor fading into the distance. Panting with his rock still protectively clutched to his chest, Enrique took a second look at the soft lights a few hundred yards up the dirt driveway. He started making his way toward the lights. Oh yeah, the barbed wire gate. Fuck. Upon further inspection, Enrique realized the genius property owners had simply built a 4-foot barbed wire gate across the driveway without a fence on either side of the gate. Picking his way around the gate, he continued up the driveway. He soon came to a prickly pear cactus wall lining the backyard of an adobe shack. He could dimly make out the thick walls from the glow of light peeking out of the tiny window slits covered with iron bars. He could also make out a clothesline with ghostly garments swaying gently in the night breeze. His heart swelled with hope. Crawling on all fours, Enrique carefully felt ahead of himself before each movement through the cactus barrier. Fortunately, even the cactus wasn't prosperous in this god-forsaken hole and had left enough room for him to slip through it into the backyard. The inky blackness was already softening into the rosy glow of dawn by the time Enrique made his way back to his mother with his precious hoard of well-worn clothing. In the widening daylight, they could see the town of Santa Ynez off in the distance. He and Nadia had gotten closer to civilization than they had realized. Enrique did not look well at all. He kept shaking uncontrollably, and the pupil of one of his eyes was dilated. They got a ride as far as Ensenada and holed up in a cheap dive for a few days so that Enrique could recuperate. They rode a bus to Tijuana and began to ask around for a way to get into the United States. A bartender introduced them to a well-dressed Mexican man who owned rental properties in Ensenada. He drove back and forth across the border often and knew many of the border police. The border police were accustomed to seeing him and never searched his car. He agreed to take them to Los Angeles in the trunk of his car for $100, on the condition that they take Enrique to a doctor in Los Angeles. When Nadia protested that she had no money, the Mexican man told Nadia that American doctors were very cheap and that she could pay him later. The Mexican man took Enrique to a county hospital in Los Angeles. The doctor insisted that Enrique check into the hospital immediately. My God, he had told the Mexican man. It's a miracle that this young man had survived such a severe concussion with no medical treatment. Enrique ended up staying in the hospital for 3 days. When he was well enough to leave, the Mexican man went to the admitting desk to settle up the bill. The clerk handed him over the invoice. It read $2,600. The Mexican man calmly counted out 26 $100 bills to the clerk. He walked back to where Nadia and her son were waiting. Nadia was very anxious. "How much is the doctor, senor?" "The charges were minimal, Nadia. You owe me $25. Nadia sighed in relief and paid the Mexican man from the meager funds she had left. She felt that this had to be a sign of better times to come.